Okay, welcome. It's my pleasure to introduce the guest for today as the next installment in the ISHAM Pioneers in Mycology. And I'm joined by Professor David Guest. David, would you like to give us a really quick introduction to who you are, what you do, and your background in mycology?
Thanks, Justin. I'm emeritus professor in plant pathology. So my interest has been in looking at diseases of plants, particularly diseases caused by fungi, but also those organisms that we used to think were fungi, but now turn out to be oomycetes.
So what got you into mycology? How did you end up in this world, and what's kept you interested so long?
I grew up on a farm in New South Wales, west of Sydney, and our farm grew wheat as the main crop. And so I became aware of fungal diseases of crops. And that was my primary interest. I was always very interested in agriculture and the losses that are caused by fungal diseases. And so I came and studied agriculture at the University of Sydney here. And as I went through the different courses, the thing that fascinated me most was the way that plants interact with microbes, particularly fungi.
Hmm.
And if you think about plants, they grow in an environment, well, their roots are in soil. The soil's full of microbes. Their leaves are continually bombarded by spores and insects and bacteria. Yet you look at plants out in the environment, most of the time they're healthy. And so that got me to thinking, well, how is it? Plants don't have an immune system. They don't have a circulatory system or antibodies, any of those things that we learnt about in human biology. So how is it that plants are able to protect themselves? And in many cases, you see trees living for hundreds or thousands of years in this pretty hostile environment, yet they're able to manage. So that generated my curiosity in how plants interact with their environments. And then I started looking at fungi in those environments being a major part of the soil microbial community, the aerial community as well. But how do fungi and plants interact? How do we manage those crop diseases? And when those crop diseases occur, farmers lose millions of dollars. In developing countries, that can cause food security issues. The economics, the global economics of, if you look at now, how the wheat crop in Ukraine is performing affects the global wheat price. So all of these things have all sorts of impacts. So these little fungi that live in the soil or float around in the air can have these massive impacts.
Yeah.
And even going back further, my family came from Ireland in 1851. When I started to learn more about the history of crop disease, I learned about Phytophthora blight on potatoes and the Irish potato famine. And that was the reason that my family came to Australia. So there's a personal
Yeah.
interest there.
So there's kind of multiple ways that you've been, I guess, recognizing in your career that it's not just the One Health interactions between fungi,
Mm.
environment, plants, animals, but this bigger societal challenges can be
Yes,
related.
yes,
Can you
yes,
talk a
that's
bit more
right.
about that?
How they have these massive impacts. So one of the things that you read about mycology and fungi and the historical impacts, mushrooms. I learnt about the Salem witchcraft trials and how that coincided with an outbreak of ergot poisoning. So basically, people were eating bread that was contaminated with lysergic acid and hallucinating and believing that all of these strange things that were happening were because of witches. So you've got the impact of mycology on witchcraft. Jeanne d'Arc, I love the story that Jeanne d'Arc, when God appeared to her and told her to drive the British out of France, again, that coincided with an outbreak of ergot poisoning. So, who knows how she saw God, but these things have not just economic impacts, but all sorts of deep impacts on humans and
Yeah.
society. So you think about mushrooms, you think about witches, you think about famine, migration, all of these things that are a consequence of fungal infections of crops.
Really shaping society.
Yes, Yes, yeah, in a huge way. And in a way that most people don't even know about. And I guess that's one of the other things that fascinated me about fungi was how little we know about them.
Yeah.
And I did my honours project looking at, there was a fantastic new fungicide that came out in the 1960s, 1970s, which was a benzimidazole, very effective against fungi. Uh, but very rapidly, AMR appeared. The target fungi
Hmm.
suddenly became resistant. So my honours project was looking at how that would happen. Um, One of the results that I found was that actually, when you treated a common fungus with this chemical, you did get rapid resistance, and that the mutation rate or the appearance of resistance was much greater than the natural rate that you would expect. And then I looked under the microscope and I could see the chromosomes separating during mitosis. And this chemical was basically stopping the formation of the microtubules and the
Hmm.
mitotic spindle. So the nuclei weren't separating, bits of chromosomes were getting left behind and all sorts of things like that. And looking into that, I then found out that, oh, actually, fungi don't do mitosis like every other organism. They have
Okay.
their own sort of mitosis. And every time I looked at fungi, there was something that was different about them. They just, their biology is just so different
Yeah.
to other organisms.
It's I mean, it's obvious from the things you're already speaking about that you've come at fungi from a lot of different disciplinary
Mm,
lenses, if you like. And certainly I know that you've worked a lot in One Health, but
mm.
really since before the term One Health was coined. So
Yeah,
when did you realize this was going to be a transdisciplinary sort of life for you?
yeah. Well, I was working in the School of Botany at the University of Melbourne as a mycologist. And of course, during that time, we realized that some of the organisms that I was working with, the phytophthora, the cause of late blighted potatoes and dieback in Australian forests and many other crop diseases as well, they're not actually fungi. They're algae that, like the malarial parasite, have, originated as an alga and then lost their chloroplasts and became parasites. Plasmodium specialized on animals, Phytophthora specialized on plants. So completely different evolutionary background to fungi. Um, but then during that work, there are a number of other things that happened. So one day I got a phone call from a fellow, Michael Abramson at the Alfred Hospital, and he was part of their asthma research unit. And Michael said, look, also at the School of Botany, some colleagues had identified pollen, grass pollen, as a major allergen. Melbourne was and probably still is the asthma capital of the world. And so there was a big incidence. There were huge, massive reportings of adult asthma when there were thunderstorms in spring and summer because of the grass pollen exploding, and then you inhale the allergens, the starch particles with the allergens. He said, but there are other things that we're still not sure about. We know that dust mites are a problem, allergy to cats and things like that's a problem, but there's still a gap. And so we have patients who come in with a severe asthma attack. They stay in hospital for a couple of days. They're fine. They go home and they're back. They're straight back. So there's something in their homes, and we think molds may be involved. So, and he said, this is where we need your help as a mycologist to come and identify these molds. So we did a lot of work with Michael's group at the Alfred Hospital and identified that mold was a major factor in indoor allergen exposure in adults.
Mm.
And of course, mold and dust mites go together because the dust mites eat the mold. Right, so there's an association between skin flakes, but the dust mites don't actually eat the skin flakes. The dust mites eat the mold that grows on the skin flakes. So you've got a double whammy. You've got allergy to the fungi cladosporium was the most common one. So an allergy to that, as well as an allergy to the dust mite that feeds on that.
Oh,
So
fascinating.
as I looked into that more, I realized that, well, actually, there's a lot of other human fungal diseases that are caused by molds, people sleeping rough, inhaling cladosporium and alternaria, spores from the grass, farmers handling bales of moldy hay, all sorts of things like that. So I started to recognize these links between the environment, people's occupations, what they're exposed to, and how that affected their health. And then, of course, the flip side of that is that, well, and this goes particularly to the work in developing countries, if people are suffering from diseases caused by exposure to allergens and pathogens in their environment, they then can't work. And often so they can't do their farming work. That cuts their income, creates all sorts of health issues for them and their families, which in developing countries are often very difficult to treat. So you've got this interaction between people's occupation, their environmental exposure, farming, and human disease, allergy and disease that is fundamental to poverty, a lot of the poverty in the developing world.
I say you're unusually positioned between the human and plant pathology worlds. I think there's not
Mm.
many people working in that crossover
No.
section, even in mycology. So from that vantage point you have, I guess what can the human and animal mycologists
Yeah.
learn from the plant pathologists and vice versa?
Yeah. Look, this is a great question, and it's a, it's a really difficult question. The first thing I'd say is that the sort of discussions that we have are really important to that, because you start to think, and it was the same working with Michael and other medical people I've worked with. Those discussions think, oh, hang on, that happens in humans. Oh, really? Well, this is what happens here. And you start to develop an understanding of, even though things superficially look totally different, there may be underlying factors that are in common. Um, I went to a meeting recently, and there was a technology company showing us about uh, microscopically observing gene expression in single cells. Now, they've developed that for cancer and human infections, but you can obviously see how that would, answer so many questions in plant disease as well. Because when we study plant diseases and we look at the way that plants defend themselves, so you look at, well, plants produce a whole range of antifungals. They have programmed cell death uh, around the pathogen, which then creates this environment of dead cells. So many fungal pathogens are biotrophs. If the plant cells are hypersensitive, then they can't get any nutrition. And then what the plant does is pump those dead areas full of antimicrobial compounds so that they create these toxic little microenvironments. So that works if the plant gets those defenses in place rapidly enough and in great enough magnitude to stop the pathogen from escaping. But the problem is in plant pathology, if you want to study those reactions, you take a, you know, clump of tissue, and that clump of tissue, you grind it up and you look at gene expression, you look at levels of antimicrobials, things like that, and you end up with an average. And that average includes cells that are responding, cells that aren't responding. So yeah, it's hard to interpret and get really good data. But things like having technologies that have been developed for human disease, like looking at what's happening in individual cells that are in direct contact with the pathogen, opens up all sorts of possibilities in plant pathology as well as. So there's all sorts of technological reasons. The other thing about what we do in plant pathology very well is we look at plant pathogen populations, right? And so through that, we've developed really good understanding of the way of monitoring fungal populations, fungal variability, the way that they can adapt. And that is sort of a consequence of there are a couple of things you can do in controlling crop diseases that you can't really do in human diseases. Burn them, burn the infected patient. But the other thing is that you breed crops. You can breed crops that have genetic resistance to the pathogen. Um,
I say neither of these are sounding very appealing for human medicine.
well, no, that's what I mean. You can't do it. But through that, through being able to breed plants with genes that encode resistance to fungal pathogens, what happens is, of course, that the fungi evolve, and those genes encode receptors for fungal effectors, right? So the fungi just switch their effectors, right? And they overcome those resistance genes. But through that process of breeding crop or resistant crops, and then understanding that you need to monitor the pathogen population because it will respond and change because fungi are so mutable and variable. We've in plant pathology, we've developed really good ways of monitoring genetic variation in fungal pathogen populations. And I think that's it's not something I've heard a lot about in medicine.
Yeah, that's maybe part of the book we could take a leaf out of. Yeah,
Yeah. So there are so many lessons backwards and forwards,
yeah,
and uh, that's why I really love these discussions of being able to say, well, this is what happens in plants, what happens in animals, and oh yeah, vice versa. It's fantastic.
yeah. I think we can, almost everybody who's working in mycology can agree that fungi compared to bacteria and viruses really get a lot less attention than
Yeah.
they deserve. Like, what do you think are the reasons for that relative invisibility over time?
Yeah, well, the first thing is the invisibility. The fact that fungi most live in the soil. That's their natural habitat. So you can't see them. You see mushrooms coming up and you can see, ringworms when you get an infection, but apart from that, they're invisible. So that's the first thing. You can't see. It's not like the charismatic megafauna, where you can cuddle a koala. That just tears everyone's heartstrings. If you say, look, our koalas are dying, or at the moment with bird flu arriving in Australia, the impact that has on our penguins, for example, um, that gets public attention. But trying to get public attention focused on fungi, um, well, it happens every now and then because people eat poisonous mushrooms or people are interested in psilocybin and its potential therapeutic effects or its recreational effect. Beyond that, we know so little about fungi. And I think that the figure is still, we estimate that only about 5% of the fungi that exist have been named.
Mm.
And if you think of what I tell students, if you think about that, so from those 5% of fungi, we've got all of those um, crop pathogens, human pathogens. We have the source of penicillin, of antibiotics. We have all sorts of therapeutic drugs, that have come from fungi. Um, Imagine what's out there in the other 95%.
Yeah,
So I think it's largely just that you can't see them. Um, the ones that people think about mold on their food or something like that, they're things that you want to get rid of. They don't spark an interest
yeah.
in many people. And it's hard to go out there and convince people that you really need to know more about this because it impacts on your life in this way and this way and this way and this way.
I'm glad you highlighted the potential beneficial and industrial uses of fungi. So it's not only that we're blind to threats, but we're blind to all this potential as well.
Bread, beer, and cheese.
Yeah.
Where would we be without that? And they're all because of a fungus.
And I think thinking forwards and reflecting on changes, we don't have a current good description of the population of what's happening with fungi globally, and we're entering a period of accelerated climate change
Mm.
that's known to be affecting the distribution and behavior of multiple pathogens.
Yes.
When you think about fungi and climate change, what makes you worried?
Well, what sort of environmental conditions do fungi like? Warmth and humidity. What is climate change heading us towards? More humidity and more warmth. So clearly, climate change is leading to the sorts of conditions that suit fungi really well. Um, so of course they're going to become more significant. Going back to the work on indoor mold exposure and asthma. So one of the reasons that it's so prevalent in Melbourne is because during winters, houses are usually heated, um, but where you have exterior windows, if you look in the morning in your bedroom, you'll see condensation. Condensation is exactly where cladosporium will grow. So you're spending 7, 8 hours, whatever, in your room. Not only are you being exposed to the dust mites and the molds that might be in your pillow, or you've also got mold growing on windowsills. So, the answer to that is improved ventilation. It's really quite simple, but that's not an option for many people. So if you think about how climate change is affecting molds, there's a direct impact you can see on the potential to get more spores in the air that are going to cause a lot more problems for respiratory disease.
Yeah. And I mean, beyond our shores, a lot of your work has been in developing countries and with smallhold farmers and
Mm,
bigger hold farmers.
mm.
And just thinking about your experiences there and problems that you anticipate with climate change going forwards, a little bit looking back and a little bit looking
Mm.
forwards, what would you reflect on there?
Well, how I developed this sort of interest in all the factors that lead to the life, the comfort and the poverty and things like that of the lives of smallholder farmers was saying, well, look, I'm a plant pathologist. I can come here and show you how to control your diseases on your food crops. Right? That's fairly straightforward. But I'd go back again and visit them and say, so how did you go with my suggestion? Oh, well, we couldn't do it. We didn't, we couldn't get the labor to do it. We couldn't, I mean, there are all sorts of reasons we couldn't do it. So nothing's changed. And so I had to then ask myself, well, how am I helping them? Like I'm solving their crop problem, but they're not doing it. And so what are the reasons that they're not doing it? Do they not understand me? And I asked that question, and the answer was clearly, yeah, we know exactly what to do, but we can't do it. And well, what's this thing about labor? Because I see when I come and visit, people sitting around talking. Like, why aren't you out there looking after your crops? Well, actually, we're sitting around talking because he's got malaria, and he's got a bad eyesight, and she's got this and she's got that. Oh, so you're all sick. So in order to get you to go out and look after your crops, the first thing we need to do is to try and improve your own health. So you've got the energy and the capacity to go and do that. Like it's pretty obvious. So, but then you start to say, well, part of the problem is malnutrition because you're not growing healthy food crops.
You say it's pretty obvious, but I don't think it's always recognized.
It's not because there's no single solution. And that's what I'm getting to. You can't just go in and give them wonderful health care if they've got no food. You can't go in and give them lots of food if their health is still not the issue. So you got to look at everything together. And that's when, our colleague Marilyn Walton came along and said, you know, what you need is a One Health approach. And I hadn't heard the term before, but I was very familiar with what she was talking about because I'd confronted this issue. Well, am I wasting my time going over there and showing them how to look after their crops? Because it's having no impact. And it's having no impact because there are other independent problems that all intersect and keep them poor, keep them in poverty.
A lot of those conversations are not that easy to have. They're sensitive
No,
topics.
no.
What would you what would you say that you've learned about forming those kind of partnerships and
Yeah.
relationships that are equitable and work for both sides?
Well, one of the keys I think is to actually be able to go as a team, as a transdisciplinary team, to go to those villages and listen to the people in the village. And and it's like you then get a three-dimensional understanding of what's holding them back. You talk to villagers. I mean, of course, they want exactly the same as we do. They want to look after their children, provide for their family. It's exactly the same motivation. Um, but they've got a whole series of factors that are holding them back from realizing those goals. And so by being able to go as a team, it includes public health people, plant people, economists, you know, sociologists, anthropologists, to go as a team and listen to the people in those communities talk about what their issues are, what their goals are, what's holding them back. You get a much better understanding of what the problems are and how you can then work together. It's difficult to set up an artificial environment where you say, okay, we're going to have an interdisciplinary conference and bring people to Sydney to talk about this. Because you completely miss the context of what's actually happening out in the field. And to me, that's the magic, is being able to go out and listen to people and not bring your own preconceived ideas about what they need to do.
Yeah.
The last thing anyone wants to be told is, well, you need to do this.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you have mentored and guided generations of scientists. Wondering what qualities do you think you've observed in most successful scientists,
Mm,
mycologists, scientists at large, regardless of whether they're working in human, animal, plant,
mm.
or environmental health? What are those
Yeah,
success
the
factors?
ability to listen and hear, and then to be very honest and go back and ask more questions, engage in discussions, and then come up with some sort of synthesis about, okay, maybe if we approach it this way, and then go back to to whoever your client is, whatever research you're doing, to go back and say, how about we do it this way? And to be open to uh, completely unusual ways of doing things. When I was a student, I read a book called Against Method
Hmm.
by Paul Feyerabend, who's a philosopher of science, and he called himself an epistemological anarchist. And he said the thing about science is that it's a really good way of testing ideas. Right? You can have beliefs, uh, but you can't really get evidence that those beliefs are. You can't test them. Science provides you with a way of observing, putting together a hypothesis, and then testing that hypothesis. You can never prove it, but you can disprove it, right? So, he said, but that doesn't explain where those ideas come from. And so he was an epistemological anarchist in the sense that you need to be able to listen and take anyone's ideas seriously. So you might listen to a shaman, and the shaman may say, this is what's happening. And you may say, how could I test that? Maybe the shaman's got something, but you can test it. As a scientist, you can test it. But scientists don't have an exclusive right to original ideas.
Mm.
So an important thing about being a scientist is to be receptive to those ideas, no matter how outrageous they may be. Um,
Yeah.
we had an example, one of my projects in the Philippines. So in the Philippines, they one of their favorite fruits is durian, a very high value fruit. It suffers really badly from diseases caused by Phytophthora, one of these descendants of algae. And so I was working with a group of farmers and I wanted them to, in a way, try and become citizen scientists because a lot of people come along, salespeople come along and say, I've got this magic snake oil that's going to solve all your problems and it'll wash your car and look after your kids and it'll do everything. And the farmers don't know, so they throw their money away buying this snake oil. Doesn't work. So what I wanted them to do was to be able to ask those salesmen, so have you got any data? Have you got any evidence that this works? And then, oh gee, how do we do that? I said, look, it's actually really simple. All you need is someone comes along with something and they say it's going to solve all your problems. If they don't have data, say, look, give me a bottle and I'll test it out. And all you need to do is to put it on one tree, put water on the other tree, and see if it ends up working. Right. So one of the farmers said, I think fermented goat urine is going to be really effective. Fermented goat urine. Okay, I'm not sure how, I couldn't really figure a scientific pathway of how fermented goat urine may control Phytophthora. But I said, okay, try it. Let's do it. So we did the experiment. It didn't work, but what we did find was that he said, okay, so the reason that I did this is that fermented goat urine smells awful. Phytophthora is carried from the soil up into the tree by beetles, little flying beetles. And fermented goat urine is a repellent for those beetles. So I thought that by repelling those, spraying the trees, that would repel the beetles. And you've told me that the beetles carry the pathogens, so maybe it'd work. So this farmer actually had thought it through, and he had a well-constructed hypothesis.
Yeah. That's a good idea.
Yeah, it was a good idea. So my advice to scientists is, don't be afraid. If you get an outrageous suggestion, um, you've got the scientific method. Don't reject it out of hand. And if you think about many of our major scientific breakthroughs, it's because people have looked at what didn't work rather than what did work. Florey and Fleming. Why is this fungus killing all our bacteria? You know?
I like it. Humility and creativity
Yeah,
combined.
yeah.
Okay, we have a final couple of questions, which is looking back on your career, which contribution would you say is the thing that you're personally most proud of, not necessarily the kind of big CV accolade?
I think, it's my students. Uh, I'm most proud of the students that have come to me. They've gained an interest in fungi and plant diseases, and they've done some truly amazing projects and gone on
You
with
think of
their
one in
work.
particular?
Oh, look, it's hard to single one out because there's been a number of them that have done amazing things in their own ways. Some of them, look, I'll give you a student from one of my students from Papua New Guinea, Josie. So she came to me to study Phytophthora diseases on cocoa. Uh, she went back. There's a number of issues that you have to be aware of, in particularly in scientific institutes in developing countries. You know, if one of their staff members goes overseas for 3 years to do a PhD, there are other people who will jump into that territory, and the new PhD graduate goes back and finds that, well, what's my role? My role's been usurped. I don't have a role anymore. On top of that, she's a woman. So she faced many challenges. Great scientist, but she faced many challenges. Eventually, she conspired, well, she was conspired against and dismissed, but she didn't stop. And we kept in touch, and we still work together on various projects. For the last 10 years, she's completely, while she's still a plant pathologist, her role now is in something called family farm teams training. And so she's completely changed to almost sociology now, which is family farm teams is a program to get Papua New Guinea's a great example of the big man culture where women do all the work, but men assert all the authority, and women have to work around that. Family farm teams recognizes the inequity in that and gets families together to agree on, well, what is it that you actually want as a family? And, you know, it comes down to, well, we want to look after our children, food, education, housing, you know. Okay, you've got a common goal. Why don't you both work towards that goal? And so she goes around Papua New Guinea and other parts of the world now, um, doing this family farm teams training.
That's cool.
And it is really cool because she was a great scientist, but she saw another, you know, through circumstance, she saw another
Yeah.
opportunity.
Yeah.
Um, so
Great.
that's, yeah, it's an example of uh, not not someone, you know, I've got other students who I could say, look, they've gone on to a fantastic career in science. Um, but that's one that sticks out
Yeah.
to me because of all the challenges that she faced. But and we still speak every Friday morning. We have a WhatsApp and just talk about what's going on. So that sort of relationship that has been built over decades and is continuing, even though she's gone off in a different
Yeah.
direction.
That's fantastic. And it's a
Yeah.
testament to your multidisciplinary approach to work. And I mean, I know you, all the people
Mm.
listening may not, but your commitment is legendary to getting the answers through research. So I'm going to ask you what has been the most risky or dangerous length that you've had to go to in your quest for research truths.
Yes, well, look, there have been working in Papua New Guinea is a land of unexpected things. So one day I was working on an island, which is an active volcano just off the north coast of Papua New Guinea. We were flying in a light plane back to the mainland. It's about a 20-minute flight. 10 minutes into the flight, the engine stopped. And the pilot said, "Oh, we're out of fuel." And of course, I'm thinking, hang on, it's a 20-minute flight, and you took off with passengers with not enough fuel. Unfortunately, the pilot panicked, and we nosedived into the ocean. And we were floating around for a while. We could actually see people on the shore, um, a kilometre or so away, but it took 40 minutes or so for a canoe to come out and drag us back in. And by
No
that,
crocodiles?
yeah, well, I was worried about crocodiles and sharks. So when when I swam back up, the plane sank, and when I swam back up to the surface, I was thinking, well, uh, I'm conscious. I've got 2 legs and 2 arms still, but oh no, where's this blood coming from? And I had a gash on my arm, and I was thinking, I don't believe this. You know, I've survived a plane crash, and now I'm going to get eaten by a shark or a crocodile. Luckily, Luckily, I didn't. Um, Other people in the plane were much more seriously injured than I was, but I survived that. And then
That's
there
it.
was a bus crash, and I mean, there are these things that you just can't anticipate. You can do all the safety planning you want, but
It's a dangerous world out there.
yeah, yeah, it's a dangerous world.
Okay, then the last question. If you have 5 minutes with a health minister and an agriculture minister together, what is it that you want them most to understand about fungi and the threat they
Yeah.
pose?
Look how the role that they play in people's daily lives, the role that they play in sickness, in health, in food. Uh, just getting them to recognize that fungi is such an important part of everybody's lives. They're a major cause of death in people. They intersect with so many other factors and contribute to poverty. And if you're serious about doing something, you'll fund more research into mycology.
What a note to end on. Thank you, David, for your time. That's been an excellent conversation.
You're welcome, Justin. It's a pleasure.